In 1974, there was a movie that came out, The Taking of Pelham 123, and it was about a group of men who hijack a subway train in New York City. In the 1970s, that movie was considered a blockbuster hit. It grossed nearly $19 million, which was a lot of money for a 1970s film. The film was actually based on a novel that was written about a year before. And as you know, when you take a movie and you transfer it over to a book and you transfer it over to a movie, there's always some slight changes. But they did, for the most part, stay true to the book and had a lot of the core elements of the book in the movie. Well, in 2009, Denzel Washington and John Travolta starred in another The Taking of Pelham 123. It was slightly changed from the first one, and it was given a more modern context. The whole background was modern. It didn't look like 1970s. You didn't see 1970 Buicks, the big barge land boats driving around. It was just a more modern context. But again, most of the plot and the storyline was the same. The book and the two movies are an example of redux. The word redux means to bring again or to bring back. And so the book was the starting point, and then the first movie it brought again some of those things from the book. And then again, the second movie did the same thing compared to the first movie. It brought again some of those things. Take your copy of God's Word tonight, if you will, and turn over to the Gospel of John in John chapter 21. And I want to show you tonight, there's a great example of the same thing here of redux, is that you'll see a lot of the previous elements and some of the things that happened in the life of ministry are brought again into the forefront in John chapter 21. A lot of what is brought again here is brought again by the Lord Jesus Christ. And so there's a miracle here. In fact, there's really several things that are all from the Lord Jesus that happen in John chapter 21. And I think that Jesus brings these things again, brings them out again from His ministry to make some significant points about what is important about serving Jesus. And He makes it powerful by doing this. And so in the setting of the story in John 21, we're going to begin here at verse 1. We're just going to, for a few minutes, walk through this and look at this. There's some fascinating things that happen. Most of what happens in John 21, like I said a second ago, I'm going to say it in a different way, are not because of what the disciples do, but it's all about what Jesus does. And so He just brings these things again. So in the setting of the story, you know probably enough about the Gospel of John to know that Jesus' preaching ministry is over. He has been arrested, put on the cross, killed, and He's been resurrected. And He has already made 2 appearances to the disciples, and that's not if you count the appearance to Mary Magdalene at the tomb. But He does appear to the disciples on 2 occasions. So Jesus appears to them again, and so from just a basic standpoint, He also is brought again. He is brought again to the disciples, but what He's going to do is He's not just going to bring Himself again, He is going to bring about some things that have already happened in His ministry. And so in verses 1 through 6, really this text tonight, we're going to go through verse 14 tonight. And in verses 1 through 6, it's all about catching fish. That is the main idea here is catching fish. And then in verses 7 through 14, we're going to see how those fish are brought to land. And so in 1 through 6, you see it begins in verse 1. It says, after these things, Jesus showed himself again. And so there you see that phrase, showing himself again. It's the appearance of Jesus. He has already appeared to them. You find that, if you want to just look quickly, 19 through 23 is one of those appearances where he comes to the disciples when they're assembled in a room. And then in 24 through 29, there is another, in 26, it says after 8 days, his disciples were again inside, and Jesus came and he stood there. And so you see that in verse 1, he's saying that he showed himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. And so here they are, not in a closed room, but they are now outside, and they are on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. It's also called the Sea of Tiberias. And so John, the writer here, says, and in this way he showed himself, and there's a colon there. And so from this point forward, from verse 2 on, John is going to write, and he's going to show you how did Jesus appear to them. How did he show himself to them? John 21, verse 2, Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. So you see here that in verse 2, we're given who is present. It's not all of the 12. We would expect maybe, 11 of them will be there because Judas is gone, but it's not 11, and it's not even the group of the 11 because Nathanael's not one of the 12. And so there's 6, there's half of the 12 is there plus Nathanael. You know that character Nathanael, he's found in the first chapter of the book, and he's an interesting character, and I encourage you to dive deep into who he is. But nonetheless, let's stick with the story. So there's 7 disciples here. And so Jesus comes to them, and here is the background of it in verse 3. Simon Peter, he leads the disciples to an activity, and he says, I'm going fishing. And so he's going fishing, and the response there is that we're going with you also. So they go along with Peter, and he's going fishing, and so they go out on the boat, and John makes sure that we see something here in verse 3. It's very important. They got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. And so there are actually 2 or 3 things that are already have come out. Number 1, at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, this is one of those things that's brought again. In Luke chapter 5, it is Jesus that says, it's James and John and the sons of Zebedee and Simon Peter. And Jesus said to Simon, do not be afraid. From now on, you will catch men. So when Jesus comes to them at the beginning of his ministry, they are fishing. And Jesus makes a point about and makes an analogy about fishing. And he says, you're fishing for fish, but I'm going to transform you into where you can catch men. So here we are after the resurrection. What are they doing? Well, they're fishing again. This is almost like it's a redux, just like what I was talking about with the movie and the book. You have the same things that are brought up again. And so bringing it up again, and he's making a point about it. And I'm going to tell you right now what the point is. The point is that Jesus, the main activity of his disciples should be going out and fishing for people. That is the main activity. That is the main mission. Let's never forget what the mission is. The mission is to go out and find people. So he's going to tell you what you're going to do with them in a minute. But here's another thing, another element it comes from the Gospel of John, is that John makes sure that you know it's night. And night in the Gospel of John, and especially in chapter 13, it symbolizes darkness, it symbolizes sin, it symbolizes trouble, it symbolizes things where Satan is at work. And here you have something where the disciples are out at night. It's not that they've done something wrong. That's not the point of making sure you know it's night. But the point is that there is trouble here. They are not, if you know the story, you know that they're not going to be successful. So they are out at night. And then in verse 4, notice what happens. There's a shift. In verse 4, it says, when the morning had now come. Well, that's when the sun comes up. So you were at night, and now you have a transition, you have a change into a new day. And what happens at this new day is that you have Jesus standing on the shore. So you have the disciples and you have fishermen out there fishing, and they're not catching anything. They're not having success. And then we go from night to day. You see that? There's a shift from night to day. You have fishermen without fish, and you have the night, and that's what's going on. And then you have a shift to a new day, and then Jesus is there. So Jesus is standing there in verse 4, and it says, the morning had now come, Jesus stood on the shore. So when you're reading this story, you're seeing the struggle of the disciples. It's night, and then all of a sudden, you got Jesus standing on the shore. It's daytime. Well, he has been killed. He's in human logic, in human terms, I'm just say it like this. I think you'll be able to follow me. Jesus should not be there, but he is there. He is standing there. That's not a natural thing to happen. That is only of a supernatural work that Jesus appears and is standing there. He has been raised from the dead, and now he is standing there. This is all a work of the Lord Jesus. So when I said a while ago, a lot of the things that happen in the story are not of the disciples' making, but the things that are happening in the story are all of what Jesus is doing in the story. In fact, Jesus just intrudes into their lives. It was Peter that said, I'm going fishing. He didn't say, well, I'm going fishing and I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. We're going to find the Lord. That's not what he said. He said, we're going fishing. They had no idea in the back of their minds of what was going to happen next. They planned on catching fish, but they didn't catch any fish. But what they find is Jesus standing on the shore, because Jesus is controlling this whole story. And so Jesus is standing on the shore. The disciples did not recognize him. And then Jesus said to them, children, have you any food? Well, he already knows the answer to that, and that's why he's there. He's there because he knows they are not having success. And so in verse 6, and he said to them, they answered no. Real short answer, isn't it? Real simple answer. Real, I almost can imagine it in our modern day Arkansas language. It would sound something probably like, no. Kind of like ashamed a little bit. No, we ain't caught nothing. They ain't done any good. They have no success. So what you have here is fishermen without fish, and what you had is disciples without Jesus. So I hope you can make the connection there that without Jesus, there's not going to be success if you intend on carrying out the mission of Jesus. You cannot carry out the mission of Jesus without Jesus. So we need to get that straight before we move forward and try to do anything worthwhile for the Lord. Well, Jesus has the answer though, doesn't he? He redirects them, and when he redirects them, and when they listen to him, we have a different result. Isn't that interesting? Is that when we listen to what Jesus says, instead of relying on other sources of guidance, I don't know, the past, tradition, preferences, our own will, when we finally yield to the will of Jesus Christ and we start listening to Him and follow Him, then we will get a different result. And He says this, cast the net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. Now, understand this. From the perspective of fishing, they probably would have tried that. That's not the point. This is not a lesson in how to fish. This is a lesson on how to listen to Jesus. This is a lesson on the fact that He is the authoritative voice, or should be the authoritative voice and guidance for our life. That is the point of the story. If we wanted to learn about fishing, we could go buy magazines from the grocery store. They still have those? I don't even know. We could go on the internet and look up things about fishing. That's not the point of John 21. Any moron would know that you could try the other side. That's not the point. It's the fact that Jesus is redirecting them and we are to listen to Jesus. And when we do listen to Jesus, we will have success. And so they did. And now they were not able to draw it in because there were so many fish. They had a net that was overburdened with the number of fish. Their net was almost not big enough to handle the blessings that Jesus brought about when He told them to do it His way. So it's not our way, it's Jesus' way. So a ministry without Jesus is no ministry that's going to honor God. I'm just going to tell you point blank. You're not going to honor God without Jesus. If you leave Jesus out, then there is no ministry at all. Now, you can call it a ministry, and I know there's a lot of things out there that are called ministries. But if they don't have Jesus at the lead and at the center of them, they are not really ministries at all. They're man-made, self-proclaimed ministries. So this analogy of fishing that's used by Jesus is to define the mission of His churches. His churches are to be out of the business of rescuing the lost. What is the point of one of the Lord's churches? Well, the lost have to be a priority because I'm going to tell you that it's the priority of Jesus. And so we are not able to save them, but we are able to bring them to the one who can save them. That is the point of all ministry in one of the Lord's churches. So when the Lord's churches begin to depart from that focus and they forget about the lost or do not care about the lost, then just let's see what happens. Let's see the results. But the critical element of the mission is that Jesus must be the focus. In John chapter 15 and verse 5, Jesus told them, and this was in His closing words to them, apart from me, you can do nothing. So there you go. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So that's the fishing. That's the fishing trip. That's the endeavor of fishing. Now, in verses 7 through 14, I want you to see the second half of this story, and it's bringing the fish. Let's bring the fish. Let's bring this load, this haul in from the water. And where are we going to take it and why? Well, Jesus is going to explain all of that to you in verses 7 through 14. Notice what happens in 7. This is a pivotal moment in the story. A very important note. It's a realization, isn't it? Therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved, and I believe that's John. I believe it is. I can't prove it, but if you study the book of John, you'll see that phrase is in there quite a bit. It's a pseudonymous reference to the writer himself, the Apostle John. Okay? So, not John the Baptist, but the Apostle John, the writer of the book. And he said to Peter, "It is the Lord." That's what John said. Well, sometimes, and even later on in this chapter, we're going to kind of see John and Peter, John and Peter. You see them in Acts chapter 3 and 4 also, John and Peter. You saw them on the way to the tomb, John and Peter. John and Peter side by side. John, and let me tell you this, ain't not one better than the other, and that is the way it goes today with the Lord's disciples. The Lord's disciples are not rivals. The Lord's disciples are not supposed to compete with one another, supposed to be in conflict with one another. That is not what is depicted here. What is depicted, though, is this: one disciple notices something, the other disciple does something. You see that? They are both important. It's very important that we notice what's happening, isn't it? So John points out, he identifies, that's Jesus. It is the Lord. Well, look what Peter does. When Peter heard that it was the Lord, he got dressed and jumped into the water. And he goes to Jesus. Peter takes action. And so don't get wrapped up in all the trivial details about he was naked. Why was he naked? Because he was fishing. He was working. Why did he I don't know why Peter what went through his mind. He may not even have known why it went through his mind. But I think one thing is you can tell he was excited to see Jesus, and he swims to Jesus. That's the point that you're supposed to see. And you're not supposed to see them in conflict and fighting and competing with one another. That's not what it is. So one notices something which is important. The other takes action. It says in verse 8, it shows the disciples are in the boat. Now the story, it's painting this beautiful picture here, isn't it? The disciples, does that remind you of anything in any of the Gospels? The disciples in a boat? They find themselves in a boat a lot in the Gospels. One time they are in a boat, they're with Jesus, and a storm comes. You remember that story? Another time they're in a boat and Jesus is not in the boat. And what is he doing? There's a storm comes, and here comes Jesus walking on the water, and Peter goes out to him. Remember that story? So once again, another example of redux in this story you have from previous scenes in the life of Jesus. And I think Jesus is doing all of this on purpose. He is showing them and reminding them, guys, everything that we have done together had a purpose. And now I'm bringing it back in front of you again. And I want you to see this, because what he's saying is this: people may have thought it ended on the cross, but it did not end. The story is continuing. You see that? The story is moving on, and it's going to happen again. Y'all seen that movie Groundhog Day, hadn't you? I know you've seen it. I've seen it a lot. I like the movie. It happens over and over and over. Now, that's not exactly what's happening here, but it's kind of an example of it. It's happening again. It's happening again, and here come the disciples in a little boat. You see that? Verse 8. I like that word. A little boat. A little boat in a big old net full of fish. The fish are the size of the catch. The boat's not even made for what the size of the catch is. And I'm going to tell you this. I'm not made for what Jesus can do in my life. I'm not made, this is a little boat. But Jesus can do big things with a little boat. You see that? And so Peter jumps in. You got the disciples in a little boat. They were not that far from land. If you do the math here, it's about 110 yards. It's kind of a long ways, a little bit, but it's not that far from land. They can hear from there. The acoustics are pretty good off of a beach, off of the water at 100 yards. The voice of someone will bounce off. They heard the voice of Jesus. Now they're able to see him, and they, oh my goodness, it's him. And they're dragging the net with the fish. You see this? Here they come, just puttering along. You got You got Peter swimming, and you got this boat. It's a sight, isn't it? Then you got a boat that's probably kind of tipped over to one side, almost taking in water, and they're just trying to hold this thing together. But here's what they're doing. They're bringing the fish to Jesus. And that's the point. They're bringing it to Him. Well, here comes another image that's a redux. You ready? It's a charcoal of fire. There's only one other time that Greek word is found in the Gospel of John, and it is when Jesus has been arrested and Peter follows closely. You remember that? He follows closely and he begins to warm his hands over a charcoal of fire. The image would resonate in their minds as here when Jesus was being on trial, and Peter is by this charcoal of fire, and he denies the Lord. He denies Him 3 times. And now this time it is Jesus who has built a fire, and He is providing food for them. Now, in how people work, people like to be vindictive. People like to get back at people, don't they? They like revenge. Peter is given a great lesson here by the Lord, is that the Lord's not going to try to get back at him. And I'm going to tell you another toxic idea about God is that somehow God is a vindictive God, and when I do things that God's going to try to get back at me. That's not at all the case. That's far from the truth. God is a God of grace. Jesus is a God of grace, and He is so good to us, even in our weakest and worst moments of our life. Jesus is not vindictive. Jesus is forgiving. Jesus is there, and He is providing, He is giving something to Peter and the rest of them, because all of them scattered and ran away. All of them were guilty of the same thing. And now you have Jesus standing there waiting on them over a charcoal fire, one like when Peter stood over to warm his cold hands right before he denied the Lord. And this is what Jesus says in verse 10. He says, bring. And He says, bring the fish. Bring the fish that you caught. Bring them to Jesus. I hope you can make the connection here, is that Jesus enabled them to catch the fish. And then He says, bring the fish to me. Bring them to me. And He says, yeah, you've caught them. You've done that. But bring them to me. You know how they caught them. They caught them because Jesus helped them get caught. In verse 11, Simon Peter goes up and he drags the net to land full of large fish, 153. And I challenge you to research that. It's a fascinating study about that number 153. Isn't it odd, 153? Jesus put that number there, the number of fish, for a reason. I'm not going to spend a lot of time giving you all the different meanings behind that number 153. It is a perfect triangular number, by the way. And I'm going to stop there. It's a mathematical riddle, 153. It just blows my mind. But Jesus put 153 fish, exactly 153 fish. That number, you need to look that up. Anyway, 153 fish. Although, listen to this is a major point. Although there were so many, the net was not broken. Do you see that? Sometimes we go out to begin to serve the Lord and we think, oh, but this is going to fall apart. Oh, and this is going to break. Oh, and this is going to happen. Oh, and this won't work. Oh, and this will fall through. Oh, and we'll never be able to do that. And I'm telling you this, that net should have broke, but it didn't break. That is the point. Jesus said, throw the net on that side of the boat. He filled up the net. They began to pull this thing forward, and it should have broke, but it didn't break. There has to be some trust There has to be some faith when it comes to following through with what Jesus said. Stop it. Stop all the sweaty palms. Stop all the worrying. Stop all the angsting about details that you have no idea that are going to happen or going to or not or what? Just do it. Just do it. Don't have to make it hard. Just do it. Do the thing. Follow through and be obedient to the Lord. The net did not break, y'all. Look, Jesus said to them, here it comes again, come and eat. Oh my. And then he came and he took the bread and he gave it to them. 2 or 3 things are happening here. Jesus has got breakfast ready for them. I love breakfast. And I love some biscuits for breakfast. And I bet those were the best biscuits you've ever had. But does fish and bread ring a bell? I hope it does. Because Jesus fed about 25,000 people one time with a little boy's lunch. Another time, Jesus said, come unto me, all you are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. All of these things just keep coming back that Jesus is showing them and reminding them. You need to hear this again is what Jesus is saying. I hope we never grow tired of hearing what Jesus said, because Jesus repeats it again and again because He knows we need to hear this again. And He invites them. The invitation is there. And Jesus then came, He took the bread and gave it. Does that sound familiar? The Last Supper. That's what Jesus did. He broke the bread and He gave it to them. Here you have once again an example of redux from the past. Jesus is reminding them, I am the one who is going to give you this bread. And this bread was broken for you. The bread is my broken body. Y'all get it, right? Same phrase that you have at the Last Supper. Now, Jesus, I couldn't help but title the message A Special Meal, because this is a special meal. And He does this special meal, and always in their culture, eating together was a sign of love. It was a sign of close fellowship with one another. Let me close with this, is that Jesus can bring, Jesus can sustain, Jesus can protect. He can do all those things. Now listen very carefully. But He has empowered us to bring to Him and fellowship with what we bring to Him. Do you understand? We are to bring to Him. We are to be not just, we bring ourselves, that's good. But we're supposed to bring others to Jesus. And it's not for numerical trophies. The world is caught up in numbers. The world is caught up with statistics. Church statistics. Oh, if you got this, you got that, you're winning. Yeah. Okay. Let me tell you how you win. First of all, you start doing it Jesus' way, and you stay on mission. And the mission is about people. The mission is, can you bring people to Jesus? Now remember what I said a while ago. You can't save them. That's not our job. It's not our job. And another thing is this. Salvation changes people. It's not our job to change them. You bring them as they are. And Jesus will do the saving. And Jesus will do the changing. So let me close with this. We go out in His name and we do the work that He has sent us to do. You can rest assured He's going to provide a way for us to complete the work. He'll complete the work and He will perfect the work. He makes our little part. They're dragging that net in, but they didn't fill the net. Jesus filled the net. When He got there, when they brought the fish, Jesus cooked the fish. And then Jesus gave it to them and fed them. Dear friend, what we do for Jesus, you ain't got to worry about going broke with Jesus. Jesus is going to make sure that your bucket stays full. You don't have to be the one who does things in a certain way to fill your bucket, to make yourself, to satisfy yourself. Let Jesus do the satisfying. Let Jesus do the providing. We don't have to do it in a way that makes us happy. Jesus is going to make you happy. When you do it His way, He's going to bless the work. And you ain't got to be the one that changes people. You say, oh, it's impossible. Yeah, it is impossible. You're trying to do something that's impossible if you're trying to change people. Let Jesus change people. And you got to do it by doing it His way. Let me say this. There aren't any perfect disciples. None. You won't never find a perfect disciple. You won't find one here, and I've never met one. I've never met a perfect disciple. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. If you thought you were perfect, I never met one. Never. But there are two kinds of disciples. You ready? There's an obedient disciple and a disobedient disciple. And an obedient disciple does it Jesus' way. An obedient disciple stays on His mission. A disobedient disciple tries to redefine the mission of Jesus to suit their own preferences and desires. That's what a disobedient disciple does. A disobedient disciple is off task. A disobedient disciple is out here saying, I know better. I'm going to do it my way. I've got a different plan. Well, you can come up with the plan. Don't mean God's going to bless it. God blesses obedience, and He blesses people that do it His way. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank You.